All right, so coming up right now is our Wildfire Prevention and Preparedness in Utah presentation being presented by Jason Curry, our Public Information Officer for the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands of the Utah Department of Natural Resources. Jason has worked for the Utah Department of Natural Resources for 22 years in public affairs and law enforcement. He has been a wildland firefighter for 18 years and currently works for the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. And I know Jason is a hands-on kind of a guy. He's out there in the midst of it, providing information, helping with that firefighter response. And he is very knowledgeable about what we can do to prevent wildfire and to prepare for it. It's happening more and more where we live, and it's such an important thing. The wildfire season is starting earlier than ever, it seems like. And this is a very important topic. So we appreciate Jason coming and sharing his expertise with us today. Please pay attention. Please provide some comments and questions in the chat window. We'll answer those as we go through, and I'll have some for Jason at the end. And we'll turn it over to you, Jason.
All right, thanks, Wade. And good afternoon, everybody. I'll go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation here. So thanks for that introduction, Wade. And so, like you said, I'm going to talk about wildfire prevention and preparedness. And a lot of times those two terms get used interchangeably out in the public sphere, but here in the world of wildland firefighting, there's a little bit of a difference. So I'll kind of explain that and then go through both of them. Prevention, when it comes to wildfire, we're talking about preventing the ignition from happening at all. It's that spark that comes from the muffler or the errant round or the campfire or whatever. And then preparedness is a little more specific to what happens before wildfire to make sure that homes and property, infrastructure, and other values at risk are prepared. And of course, how we mitigate that risk. So just for a little bit of background on wildfires, in Utah annually, we get more than 1,000 on average. That's about a 10-year average. And usually about half, a little over half of those fires are human caused. So it's a bunch of different ways humans can start fires. And we're going to talk about a few of those, the big ones. But every year, wildfires, they cause evacuations, they cause negative impacts to air quality, water quality, wildlife habitat, they damage all kinds of scenic values, they impact tourism. And so when we talk about wildfire and the cost of wildfire, the suppression cost or what it costs to pay for all the apparatus, including the aircraft and the firefighters and everything it takes to support those firefighters, that's the suppression costs. But we have another term that we often use called the true cost of wildfire. And that takes into account all of the other things, not just the suppression costs, but the other impacts to air quality, watersheds, wildlife habitat, scenic values, tourism, even the things that happen after wildfire, like reseeding of the vegetation and the expense behind that, mudslides, debris flows. And so that true cost of wildfire is a lot bigger than just the suppression costs, which oftentimes in bigger fires can go into the millions. But the worst part about wildfire is that it is at times deadly. We've lost lives here in the state of Utah, and we've also lost homes. So last year, just for context, we had almost 1,500 wildfires reported. And that's a lot. I mean, that's a high number. It's not the highest number. We've had a few other years that were slightly higher than that. But the amazing thing about the 2020 season was the sheer number of human-caused fires, which was well over 1,100 total. And that represents an additional 289 human-caused fires over the average. And you look at that chart compared to 2019, you see not only is it more than the half that we usually get, but it's even more proportionally than it was in 2019. A little bit of the acreage. Last year, 328,000 acres burned, and the 10-year average is about 179,000. So it's very destructive when we have human-caused wildfires. Looking again at the stats from 2019. 2019 was a fairly mild season by comparison, but if you look Even there, the the share of human-caused acres burned proportionally is bigger. 77% of fires last year were human-caused, and that accounted for, again, 104,000 total acres. We had 6 homes destroyed. Out of the 5,000 plus, it's probably closer to 6,000 to 8,000 homes that were threatened that firefighters were able to save. And 187 active community wildfire protection plans. And I'm going to talk more about those CWPPs as we get a little further along. A few of our other stats. The main one I wanted to feature is the chipping events, 198 of those chipping events around the state where wildland fire personnel who are not on a fire will bring a giant industrial chipper and put it in a community where it's centrally located. And then residents who have been cleaning up their limbs and their trees and other vegetation can bring all that vegetation down to the chipping event and have it chipped up and hauled away or broadcast. So everybody probably knows who Smokey Bear is. And in fact, he's the most recognized mascot in America. And so as far as Smokey's message, we've always heard only you can prevent wildfire. But there's a few that I was going to focus on here because there are about 15 different categories. But I wanted to focus on the ones that cause the most fires and can have the biggest potential for improvement. And those are equipment, debris burning, campfires, target shooting, and then a category that we call cutting, welding, and grinding. Already this year, we have had fires caused by every one of these categories. In fact, this year so far, we've had 130 plus wildfires. And so that's statistically speaking, a lot for April 9th. In the past several years, we've never gone over 100 in the month or up to this point in an April 9th timeframe. I think the highest year in the last 6 years was 2018 when we had about 58. So we're more than double the average of the last 6 years of total fires. And not only that, but the number of acres burned this year. We're at about 6,000 acres so far, which is really quite astonishing. When you look at the stats going back again from a beginning of the year through April 8th, April 9th, we've had a few years where we've gotten up to about 1,000 at this point. But just to kind of emphasize the seriousness of where we are this season, it's bad so far. So just a little bit on equipment fires. And we had 219 of these last year. But the main things for equipment caused fires, and equipment is a big category, and that's partially why it is our biggest, because it contains a lot of different possibilities. Everything from motor vehicles on the roadway to ATVs, side-by-sides, motorcycles, lawnmowers, weed trimmers, you name it. Any motorized equipment, including heavy equipment, graders, bulldozers, backhoes, track hoes, even small engines like chainsaws and so forth. So, but most of our roadside fires in Utah get blamed on a cause that really is statistically speaking, not really that serious. And most people think, oh, somebody must have flipped a cigarette out the window to cause the roadside fire. But equipment and these categories, these subcategories, including not having properly inflated tires with adequate tread, investigated a lot of fires with flat tires or low tires. And I think most people know if you drive on a low tire, it's going to heat up and eventually fail. You get right on the rim, and either the tire itself and the rubber that's burning, or the rim that throws sparks. And that's a huge, serious problem along our highways and freeways and all the roads in Utah, frankly. And then exhaust system is a big one. Ever since the safety inspection for vehicles was done away with, we've seen an increase in these types of fires. It's no longer required that you take your vehicle to a mechanic and have them make sure that catalytic converter is functioning properly or that your muffler is attached right. So consequently, we're seeing more of these. And a little piece of that media inside the catalytic converter makes its way out through the rest of the exhaust system and out on the side of the road. It can be 1,500 degrees when it hits the vegetation, and it only takes somewhere between 450 and 500 degrees to ignite dry grass on a summer day. Brakes are another one. Having poorly maintained brakes, if it's metal on metal, that's gonna throw sparks. And then trailers. Trailers is a big one. I can't tell you how many fires I've investigated or series of fires along a roadway where we arrive, start putting out fires, and then maybe a quarter mile up the road or right there at the last fire, there's a trailer with not only a flat tire, not only the tire being completely gone, not only riding on the rim, but the rim being completely gone, riding on the axle. And fires started all along the highway for miles back. So trailers are a big one, and even the chains that you use to secure your trailer, safety chains, are a big cause. If you've ever been behind a vehicle that was dragging those chains, you know what it's like in the dark, especially to see how much spark can be emitted. And then again, mowers, chainsaws, trimmers, and heavy equipment. Those are the big ones. Debris burning and campfires, I'll kind of combine these two. There was 139 debris burning fires last year, and just over 100 campfires that turned into wildfire. The main thing about this is weather, especially when it comes to, if you're going to put fire on the ground on your property, near your home, and you don't know what the weather's going to be like in an hour or two or three or the rest of the day, really, that is begging for disaster. And of course, in the news, we've seen quite a few stories that basically match up with that. Somebody has a fire, and either during the time where they're tending it, lighting it, or after the fact, the wind comes up and creates a massive problem. So weather is number one to watch for. If you're debris burning on fence lines, ditch banks, or that pile of logs or other trimmings and debris, that's big. And then same thing with campfire. Wind is your enemy, especially if you have it so big that it's not manageable. And then size and pacing, having a sensibly sized fire, both in the debris burning and the campfire category, and just going slow, especially if you're going to have something that goes along a ditch bank, or if you're burning a field, just go slowly and don't get ahead of yourself. Have some tools to put the fire out, including water, fully charged hose, fire extinguisher, shovel, and plenty of helpers. Because if it does end up getting beyond what you intended, you're going to need help. And if the fire department has to come, then there's a chance you're going to have to pay for it as well. So that's not something that we like to do, but oftentimes that's the case. And then finally, just leaving too soon with both debris fires and campfires. It is all too common out there in both our forested lands, the West Desert, agricultural lands. If you leave too soon and take off, that's a Class B misdemeanor, if it escapes or not. But if it does escape, then you add the burden of having a wildfire as well. So like they say with campfires, you stir in water, make sure that it's cold to the touch. And if it's too cold, or if it's too hot to touch rather, then it's too hot to leave. Target shooting. This is a big one that has really, we got some great progress on this cause over the last several years. In fact, 2012 was kind of a high mark when we had about 32 wildfires caused by target shooting. And then we really worked hard on this one, made a lot of efforts to reduce and work with the shooting sports community, shooting enthusiasts, sporting goods stores. We saw a lot of decline. Last year, though, we broke the record with 51 fires that were caused by target shooting. And this can be anything from exploding targets, like the picture that you see here. I'm sure many of you probably saw the news story about this one. It was in Arizona. They're having a gender reveal party. Surprise, it's a boy. But that boy might not have any money for college because mom and dad now have to pay for this massive wildfire. And it did get to be a big $1 million plus fire. So again, with target shooting, weather is something to always be thinking about. I love shooting. I take my family shooting, go out with friends shooting, and I do not do it on a windy day, that's for sure. But also the biggest thing is you can shoot all day long into dirt, paper targets, regular targets. But rocks and grass, those are our biggest culprit. And then getting more and more popular now too are steel targets, the big gongs or the dueling trees. We have seen those even with regular full metal jacket bullets. They're starting fires. So the law of thermodynamics basically states that energy that is created cannot be destroyed and doesn't just disappear. It's transformed into either more energy or heat. And that's exactly what happens here. And there's a bunch that I could go into with this, but trust me, fires start from regular bullets striking rocks in the dry grass every single year here in Utah. And exploding targets, despite what some of the manufacturers have said, absolutely will start fires. There's plenty of evidence. There's video evidence, there's anecdotal evidence, and even some actual studies that have been done in a laboratory environment. So that's kind of it for prevention. Now, I hit the high ones. I hit those that we feel like people can have the most impact on. And so I'm going to shift to preparedness. And I'll talk about a few things. I'm going to talk about the wildland urban interface, or the WUI. And I'll have some graphics here in a minute that really describe that. But it's where houses and the wildland environment or nature meet. And I'll go through these others kind of briefly here. But the concept of a fire adapted community, it's not new, but it's new comparatively speaking. In the last 10 years, this has really become the term that we like to use, because we're not going to have fire-free communities. And we found out the hard way over the last 100 years or so that putting out all fires is not good for our own safety. It's not good for the ecosystem, and it's not good for trying to prevent those catastrophic wildfires. In fact, it makes them a whole lot worse because of the interruption in that natural cycle where fuels are consumed by fire periodically. And over the last 100 years, that cycle has definitely been interrupted. And so we're working on having fire adapted communities. And that means, it means something for every resident, regardless of whether you live right in the middle of Sandy City or Salt Lake City, or if it's on the benches or in like a rural development or rural Utah or agricultural land, or even that cabin tucked into the woods, which is kind of the obvious one. To be fire adapted means something for each one of those. And I'll kind of give you some clarification on that when we go through the next few slides here. And then the other one I wanted to hit on here, when it comes to preparedness, one of the ways that we in the agencies that deal with wildfire, like the Forest Service, the BLM, Division of Forestry, Fire and State Lands, and even our local fire departments, prescribed fire is something that we use to mitigate that risk, to eliminate those hazardous fuels, and eliminate that buildup that has happened over time. So one of the things that is important for people to understand when it comes to prescribed fires is compared to wildfire, smoke production is lower, the destruction that occurs is lower, the danger to communities is lower, the impacts to watersheds and air quality is lower with prescribed fire than with wildfire. So that's why prescribed fire is a great tool. That's why we continue to favor it and try to advocate for people to understand and truly be fire adapted in that way too, to know and understand that fire is not all bad. It's part of the world that we live in. It's part of the natural world. And then there's also the in-between. Oftentimes we'll see some of the land management agencies not necessarily igniting a prescribed fire, but if there's a lightning caused fire, they'll oftentimes transform that into a situation similar to what a prescribed fire would be, where they can control how much the fire moves, they can control where it goes, and some of those other aspects. And then I'll just hit on fuels really quickly. And when I talk about fuels, I'm talking about a few different categories, but the one that we're most concerned about when you talk about wildfire preparation and preparedness is the light fuels, grasses, leaf litter, the places where fires start in the first place. And those are what we call 1-hour fuels. And the categories go up, and there's 10-hour fuels, there's 100-hour fuels, and there's 1,000-hour fuels that are the big timber and forested areas. And then I want to go through basically what you can do. Some of the things that we have in the state of Utah and some national organizations and even your local fire departments and communities that may already be in place that you may not know of that are out there to explore. So when I talk about the wildland urban interface, or the WUI, this is usually the picture that comes to mind. You've got these homes that are tucked into this dense vegetated area with lots of trees. And it looks to me as a fire guy, I look at this and it gives me kind of the hair on the back of my neck stands up. And I know that if there's a fire in this community, it's going to be really dire for these homes. Here in Utah, not only do we have that situation and those types of environments, but this fire here, this is from the Capitol Hill fire from a couple of years ago. just grassland, but this fire got really close to some homes, and we still count this as the WUI. In fact, here in Utah, that's probably where most of our WUI is on our bench communities, and all throughout the Wasatch Front, and pretty much any community, there are benches, and that's kind of right in that sweet spot, so to speak, of the wildland urban interface. So this graphic here will kind of help you contextualize WUI. So if we start over on the far right, we've got the urban and town center. So if you live right in the middle of Salt Lake City. Now, usually those folks aren't going to think about wildfire danger. And it certainly is the lowest in terms of fire danger. But we've seen instances where the ember attack can affect these homes, and homes have burned in the middle of an urban center when there's a wildfire nearby. Then there's your general residential, maybe a place like Dimpledale, someplace like that, where you've got a little bit of vegetation and more trees. Then you've got your suburbs, basically, which to me, when I think of suburbs, out there in the world, I think of the small satellite communities. But for us here in Utah, that's really kind of our bench communities, and that graphic kind of depicts that. It's really where our interface is, and the corresponding graphics above kind of show that. That's our center point. That's our bullseye in terms of houses that are threatened by wildfire. Then there's rural, and rural is usually going to be more spaced out. There's going to be more interruption, not only in fuel, there's going to be more barriers in terms of agricultural fields that are green, ditches, roads, things like that. The homes are not as close together and packed in. And then there's wildlands where the risk goes up a little more. And that's like that picture that I showed first with the home that's just nestled in the trees. But here in Utah, we've got a lot of different wildlands. We've got those heavily forested areas. We've got some desert areas, and kind of the in-between with our pinyon, juniper, and sage steppe habitat, where a lot of people have second homes or property. And so all of these, if you look at the graphic above, have some threat of wildfire. And but it's that urban interface that I'm going to focus on. And when we talk about the WUI, we talk about home ignition zones. And there are 3 of them that are sort of defined in the business, so to speak. The first one is the immediate zone, and that's 0 to 5 feet from the house and including the structure itself. So this starts with building materials and anything that touches the house or anything that's within 5 feet of the house. So the next category is intermediate, and that's going to be the distance of 5 to 30 feet out. And then the extended zone, which is 30 to 100 feet out. Those are 3 categories. And so each of these 3 categories has some specific things that can be done. And I'm going to go through them. But before I do that, I'm going to show you this graphic here that kind of illustrates the threat to homes from 2 different main sources. The top one, radiant heat, is basically when the flame hits the fuel. So, in a few moments, that flame on the top part is going to hit that bush, and then it's going to hit that tree, and that radiant heat is going to ignite that vegetation. And eventually it could also get to the home and do the same thing. On the bottom picture, it's illustrating embers. And embers are just the small firebrands, the sparks, and so forth that you see. If you have a campfire, you can almost always see embers coming up, that are basically being raised up in that convective column with the smoke. And at nighttime, it's really super obvious. I'm going to show you this video that is done in a laboratory, a fire laboratory. They've built this house, and they've put on this house some things that are good and some things that are bad. And then they shower it with embers to basically experiment and illustrate what ember attack does. So hopefully, you never know how video is going to play out when you try to play it over these things, but here we go. Are we seeing it?
Yes.
Great. So I'm gonna skip ahead just a little bit. So you've got this ember storm, and they've got these ember generators, and each generator, they just blow a storm of embers onto this structure with using fans. So you can just see all of those embers. And this is similar to what the environment would be like as there's a wildfire approaching, and at 10 to 20 mile per hour wind. And that's not really that high of a wind. When it comes to a fast spreading wildfire, it's more of an average. But this is fairly moderate. And you can see those embers just pummeling that house. And you can start to see there's a few ignitions happening right there on the rain gutter, and then right down there next to the structure and some of the vegetation. The pine straw ignites in the gutters. That's what they put up there. And then the vinyl melts, and the grassy vegetation down at the base of the home also ignites. So what you're seeing in those rain gutters is actually debris, pine needles. And this roof here too it's an asphalt shingle roof. It's Class A rated, and Class A is, oh yeah, somehow we started that. Class A roofs have the highest rating for fire safety. They're not, this asphalt roof isn't the safest. A metal roof or some other composite material would be more safe, but the burning straw in those valleys will not penetrate the roof or let those flames get into the attic. So that's one of the pluses. You see as this video progresses, there's quite a bit of fire now, both in the pine needles on the roof, as well as those gutters, and then really down along the base of the structure where they had mulch and vegetation, woody vegetation. They also had some of it was untreated, basically wood shingle, cedar shakes, and there's a lot of fire on that. That was in the prior clip. This is the asphalt stuff here. So at this point, you see the fire, or the home is about to be engulfed. The whole structure is probably about to go up. And so I'll stop it there and move on. But so you can see that most of the impacts and most of the fire that we worry about in the 3 zones is the immediate zone, that's 0 to 5 feet. That's where we get most of the ignitions that take a home. Usually homes that are destroyed in wildfire are not through the radiant heat or the advancing fire like I showed in that slide a few back. It's that ember attack. The embers, like is shown in that video, that's usually what takes homes in wildfire. The flame front that comes through on a home that is built with good fire safe materials and has cleaned up, usually the fire will burn around the structure, and those flames won't be enough. They won't be there long enough or hot enough to ignite the structure. It's the small stuff, the combustible stuff. So in this zone, the immediate zone, our vision is to make it what's called the non-combustible zone. We don't want anything there that can catch fire. So that's kind of the vision. And so we talk about building materials, and we talk about the rest of the stuff around the home that could be a problem. So as far as building materials, one of the most dangerous things you can have is cedar shakes or wood shingles. You can see all these cracks and all these crevices where those embers could land and lodge in, and then with the wind, that stuff is just sun-baked and dry, and it will ignite really quickly. Now, that being said, this actual photo and this material that you're looking at is not even wood. These are concrete, or like a lightweight concrete composite that you can't burn this stuff. But you can see it looks every bit as aesthetically pleasing, and it looks really nice to use this stuff, and you still get that cedar shake look on a home or a cabin, which is really nice. But you've got a wood roof, you're begging for problems in an ember storm. Next one is decks, and you'll see that this deck is cleaned out underneath, and a lot of vegetation, no piles of leaves that have eddied in and gathered around the base. And then also the footings are concrete, so fire is not going to be able to travel up those footings and catch the structure on fire. So your gable vents, this one's big. Embers will go right in those gable vents, land in your insulation, which is oftentimes cellulose, which is basically just fibrous wood, very receptive to embers and super dangerous. So we advise some metal screening behind those. You can go up in your attic, get some 1/8 inch metal screen and staple it all around that, so that if there's an ember storm that hits that home, those embers are kept out of the attic. Same thing with this gable soffit and eave soffit. It needs to be sealed like this one is, not open. Embers can get lodged up in the open eaves and gables and get established there as well. So here are the basics that you can do. Clean your roofs and your gutters of dead leaves, debris, pine needles that can catch those embers. That is probably the number one and the easiest thing you can do every year, and probably multiple times throughout summer, especially just depending on where you live. I know my mother-in-law's house, she's got these big pine trees, and several times a year you have to go up and clean those things out of the gutters. Replacing missing shingles, like I said, get in those eaves and those gable vents and install that 1/8 inch metal mesh, reduce embers from being able to get through there and get into your attic. Repair any loose window screens, any broken windows, and then any areas that are below patios and decks, you can screen those in as well. What it does is it not only protects from having those embers move in, but it protects from having leaves and dry grass and other light fuels from accumulating. And then this one also is a big one, moving anything away from the structure that is combustible. Mulch, you don't want to have mulch up against your home. Flammable or woody leaves, plants, pine needles, piles of firewood. You'd be surprised how many people pile a big pile of firewood right against the home. And if an ember lands in that pile of firewood, it will do just what it was cut to do. And unfortunately, will take the structure with it most times. Anything stored under the decks or porches that's combustible should be removed, especially gas cans, lawn mowers, snow blowers, things like that that have gas in them, or at least drain those of fuel if you're going to store them under there. The intermediate zone is that 5 to 30 foot zone. We want to call that, and I have our vision for that one be the lean and green zone. I want everything in there to be lean or trimmed up and thinned, and also green plant material or grass. Grass is great for this zone. You want to make sure you're clearing vegetation from under those large stationary propane tanks. If you've got one of those, you want to create fuel breaks with your driveway, with footpaths, patios, other features that are part of the structure or part of the layout of the yard, and use those for fuel breaks between vegetated areas. Keep the lawns and the native grasses mowed to a height of 4 inches or less. And then you want to remove ladder fuels, and that's the vegetation under the trees and under the shrubs and everything that allows the fire to basically use it as a ladder and advance up higher into the tops of the trees, into the crowns. And you want to prune trees from 6 to 10 feet off the ground. And of course, if you did that on a shorter tree, you wouldn't have any branches at all. So common sense, and about 1/3 of the overall tree height is good for those smaller trees. And then there's some guidelines on tree spacing, minimum of 18 feet between the crowns of the trees. And the distance increases with slope. If you're on the side of a hill, then that distance should increase. And there's a lot of good information I'm going to share with you at the end, where you can find some reference material that will basically be in the form of handbooks and guides and everything to help with some of this stuff. Tree placement is important. You don't want to place a tree that when it gets mature, that the canopy is going to be closer than 10 feet to the edge of the structure. If a tree gets involved and it's closer than 10 feet, you've got a very high chance of igniting the structure. And then in this intermediate zone, any trees and shrubs should be clustered. So small groups with breaks in between, because then if you do get that ember that lands in the middle of some flammable vegetation, maybe you'll have a spot fire in the middle of your intermediate zone, but there's not that continuity where the fire can keep advancing and spreading toward the home. This is just kind of an illustration of what I mean when I talk about ladder fuels. The bottom, or the before, has a lot of younger trees. It's got some deadfall. It's got limbs going all the way to the ground in some cases. And then up above, or the after, everything's nice, neat, and clean. There's some spacing there. Everything is 6 to 10 feet up off the ground. So fire moving through there, it might be ground fire because there's always going to be, in a circumstance like this, there's always going to be stuff on the ground to burn, whether it's like grass or leaf litter, pine needles, anything like that. But a ground fire is not nearly as threatening and catastrophic as a crown fire that would probably happen in the before version of this one. So then the extended zone, which is the 30 to 100 foot, we want to make that one and have our vision be the reduced fuel zone. Because now we've got a lot more real estate. If you've got a big lot, then heavy accumulations of ground and litter debris, piles of wood, that's a big no-no. You need dead plant material, got to get rid of that stuff. Small conifers that are growing between the mature trees or underneath them, they're basically ladder fuels or trailer fuels. And then any vegetation that's right up next to storage sheds, outbuildings, and other structures should also be removed. You kind of can treat those structures as if they have their own immediate zones of 0 to 5 feet. Any trees within 30 to 60 feet of the home should have, I'll have to minimize this, have at least 12 feet between the canopy tops. And then if it's 60 to 100 feet from the home, should have at least 6 feet between the canopy tops. So you can see it kind of decreases as the distance increases. Here's a little illustration of that. You can see the no ignition, or the no combustibles zone is free of any vegetation. The 15 to 30 feet, or the intermediate, has 5 to 30 feet, little clusters. And then as you move out, the distance decreases. Zoom in a little bit, you can kind of see that, that external, or that 30 to 60, or that 60 to 100 foot zone. So the next thing I want to talk about is this, this tool that is available for everyone to use, and it is Utah's Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal, or URAP. There's been a lot of work put into this tool, and it's designed for you to use to assess your own risk on your own property, whether it's your home in the middle of the city, or on the bench, or out in some rural community, anywhere in the state of Utah. So I'm going to do a quick demo of that. I may have to stop sharing and then reshare this, make it work. All right, let me know if you can't see this, but I'll go on assuming that you can. So this is the portal. It's free to use. You can use the public viewer or the professional. The professional viewer just means you have a few more tools and you just have to register an account. For the public viewer, you do not have to register an account. All you do is click on it, and it will take you immediately to, first and foremost, a disclaimer, kind of a waiver, just making sure that you've read all the small print and you know that this is not a perfect solution. It's just one tool. Okay, looks like I already clicked that. So we see a map of the state of Utah, and I'm just going to choose kind of just some area over here, and I'm going to zoom in. You can see there's some colors here. Green, and that's low fire risk, all the way up to orange and red, and that dark red is the highest fire risk. So if I just kind of zoom in, what I want to do is use some of the tools over on the left. See. Looks like this is keeping my prior view, so it looks a little bit different. But when you get on here, you can reduce these layers so that they kind of go away, and then you can see the actual map. So if I click home here and go back, I'll try that. I click on map themes, I can change from risk, which shows one set of data, to threat, and then wildfire effects. You can read more about these in these little tabs that show the information. I'm going to keep it on wildfire risk. I'm going to reduce the opacity of this layer, and now I've got a map, and I also want to change the base map to be an aerial view so that I can see where my place is. Oh, okay, so let's go over here. So let's say I've got one of these places here. I can bring the opacity back up with this little slider. And it looks like here my risk is fairly low, my threat fairly low, and the effects are a little higher. So there are a bunch of different factors that go into this, but if I click here, and if I click right on this button that says assess your location, I'll get a report. It says here it's very, very low, has some information preliminarily, and then I can click here and download the full report. It'll make me enter a report. Make up a name. And it'll generate a PDF. It's about 4 pages long that gives me kind of the basic layout of the land in terms of fire danger, fire risk. And it will also give me kind of the basics of what I should be doing on my property as far as preparedness and risk reduction. Talks about the expected fire intensity. The report includes precautions and preparations and gives you some goals and some things that you can start doing right away. So this is something that anybody can do. And it is a really granular tool. You can go right down to a single lot level. Really super helpful. So again, that website is utahwildfirerisk.utah.gov. Next one I was going to cover is basic community fire planning. So for community fire planning, there's already a lot out there that has been done, and there's a lot available in terms of tools. So in terms of tools, this page right here, which is on our website, ffsl.utah.gov, you can go to the community fire planning page, and it talks about the goals and the objectives, but really right here where these documents are is probably the best part of the whole site. You've got a 2017 list of completed wildfire community preparedness plans. So you may already be living in a city, town, or HOA that has a CWPP. There are hundreds of them here in Utah, and almost everywhere is covered by one. But if not, you can look at this list and see if you see that your community, your homeowners association, or your city, town, county isn't covered, then there are some other tools, including the process guide and even a community fire planning document template that you can use to basically create your own community wildfire preparedness plan. And of course, this is just a template, but it starts out with very formalized signature pages. It's got kind of the outcomes, the resources, some liability stuff, area for maps. But this is a big effort. It takes more than just one person or a few people. You have to have buy-in from your community leaders, you have to have buy-in from a few involved residents who are interested in this stuff. But that community wildfire preparedness plan is again, probably in your community, and there's a way for you to be part of it. And then finally, I wanted to also just share with you in terms of evacuation. I know we've talked about a lot of evacuation and emergency preparedness type things. And with wildfire, it's kind of funny because it is really it's the only disaster that we fight. Most natural disasters we don't fight, and we don't really mitigate. We're talking about hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, things like that. You can detect and you can do certain things to mitigate your risk, but you don't actively fight the event itself. You can't fight an earthquake. You can't fight a hurricane or a tornado, but wildfires, we fight them. This video here is about a program called Ready, Set, Go. And it's a national program that started in CAL FIRE, but has been adopted throughout the entire US, and many of the fire departments here in Utah basically do this same thing. So I'll play this video real quick, and then we can move to the questions if there are any.
Massive wildfire exploded early Thursday morning, burning nearly 25,000 acres.
The fire has forced new evacuations this morning.
The fire moved up a ridgeline and then caught the Santa Ana winds perfectly.
In the summer of 2008, nearly 2,000 lightning-sparked wildfires scorched over 1 million acres across California, destroying hundreds of structures and impacting the lives in the surrounding communities forever.
I never thought it was going to happen to me. You know, you always figure it's the other guy that's going to get their house burned.
And with California's Mediterranean climate, another fire siege of that magnitude is just a matter of time. I'm CAL FIRE's Daniel Berlant. Devastating wildfires occur every year across the state, putting lives, property, and the state's natural resources at a constant threat. In California, wildfires aren't a question of if, but only a question of when. If you choose to live near a natural area of the state, you are at risk for wildfires, and it's your responsibility to prepare yourself, your family, and your home. And that preparation starts with 3 simple steps. Ready, set, go. Getting ready before a wildfire happens is a vital first step in protecting yourself and your property. Beginning in the spring months, well before the peak of fire season, you should carefully assess your property and start taking steps to prepare for the hotter months to come.
As firefighters are responding to fires throughout California, one of the most important things they can look for is defensible space.
Defensible space is the required 100 feet between your property and the surrounding wildland area. Defensible space has consistently been shown to be the best, most practical first line of defense for your home against wildfires. Adequate defensible space provides a barrier to slow, or in some cases even halt, the progress of fire that would otherwise engulf your property. It also helps ensure the safety of firefighters while they defend your home.
I'm going to have to go to homes that provide some type of clearance for my firefighters. I cannot go to a home that has brush and everything growing right up to it. I've got to pick a home where I can safely make a stand, and if we get stuck there, that we can survive it as well.
When the destructive lightning siege fires burned throughout California in 2008, defensible space once again proved to be a key element around the homes that survived, while many homes without adequate clearance were not as fortunate. But defensible space isn't the only factor in protecting your property. Another critical step is hardening your home. During a wildfire, loose flying embers can find weak points on the outside of your home. Hardening your home means reinforcing these vulnerabilities. CAL FIRE Battalion Chief Nick Schuler demonstrates some of the components of a well-defended home.
As you see here, they have an excellent green belt around their home. All of their trees are limbed up, so there's no dead and dying vegetation around their home. And as you can see, as we walk along, all the leaf litter's been picked up, and we move straight into the fire-resistant construction. They have the stucco siding, they have the enclosed eaves, and the composite roof, all proactive steps that this homeowner's taken to reduce fire potential.
Now that you have your home ready for a wildfire, it's time to get set by preparing your most valuable assets, your life and the lives of your family. You should start by creating a wildfire action plan. A wildfire action plan gives you and your family a chance to plan out and write down important information and special preparations that you'll need to take as a wildfire approaches.
As part of your wildfire action plan, you want to sit down with your family and talk about things like escape routes, what roads are you going to take when you leave the house, and the other thing is where are you going to go? You want to have a meeting location.
Your family's plan will be unique depending on your circumstances, so it's vital that you practice and update it regularly to keep everybody prepared. It's also important to plan which belongings in your house you'll need to take with you in case of evacuation if you have time.
Prepare what you're going to take with you when you leave. There's nothing worse than packing up to leave and you realize you didn't take anything that you really wanted to. You took stuff that just was the first thing you saw.
Wildfires can move quickly and can change direction into a surrounding community without warning. With the assurance that your home is now well defended and your family's wildfire action plan in place, when a wildfire approaches, you're now ready to go. During a wildfire, emergency personnel may not be able to warn everybody, so it's up to you to take the initiative to stay informed by listening to the TV or radio for announcements. If an evacuation is imminent, it's time to set your wildfire action plan into motion. Don't wait to be ordered to leave your residence, just go, and go early. By leaving early, you give your family the best chance of surviving a wildfire.
Follow the directions of fire and law enforcement, and if you feel threatened, you need to go ahead and get out of that home. We have a lot of systems in place to notify you of that, but you have to be willing to get out and get out early.
Although wildfires can be unpredictable, destructive, and deadly, they're an undeniable part of California's wildland. Wildfire is coming, and it's the steps you take now that will ensure you, your family, and your home have a fighting chance when it happens. For more information on how to prepare for wildfires and for a wildfire action plan checklist, visit
So that ready, set, go is an important thing. And fire departments all across Utah know about that program, and they preach it. Be ready, get set with that plan, and go whenever the evacuations are called for. So that pretty much concludes things for the presentation. And if there's any questions, we can address those.
Yes, Jason, thank you very much. Excellent. I loved the graphics, the visuals there, the risk map, great information. A couple of questions. First one was, in the state of Utah, how many gallons of gas can one store? There's probably, maybe there's ordinances and there's recommendations, or?
Right, there's going to be different ordinances from city to city. Some may not have any ordinance at all, but a good guideline is about 5 gallons. If you're storing more than 5 gallons, you better have some specialized storage equipment, like I don't know if some people have a larger tank that they fuel up their farm equipment with, or their ATVs or their vehicles and things like that. But just for general household use, 5 gallons is about right.
Right, in that video that just talked about, don't wait to be notified of an evacuation in a wildfire situation. But can you kind of describe a little bit about what that would look like if an evacuation was happening in a neighborhood? How would people be notified? How much time is provided? Kind of what does that look like?
I'll be honest with you. Evacuations are the most chaotic part of wildfire response. Not only are firefighters trying to get the fire contained and trying to fight fire, but also trying to evacuate, and you involve law enforcement agencies in that as well. And that's where the order to evacuate will originate from, is your local law enforcement, probably your county sheriff or your police department. Those are the folks that are going to call for the evacuation. The fire department's going to help communicate it. Some of the community resources will help, but it can come in a lot of different forms. Stay tuned to your local news on the radio. Stay tuned to social media like Facebook and Twitter. And also stay next to your phone and register your cell phone with those reverse 911 type of notification systems that your community, your city, your town, county might have. Because in a best case scenario, in a perfect world, we'd like to go door to door and knock on doors and get people out. And that's what we strive for. But in some cases, it's just not possible. And so you got to have multiple ways to know and hear about those evacuations.
All right, thank you. Karen asks, how dangerous are firework embers? I think you listed fireworks as definitely a hazard, but you see those the embers that are kind of slowly falling down and hopefully burning out before they hit the ground. But is there a risk there?
Yeah, they're a huge risk. I mean, there's a reason why the professional fireworks exhibitors have fire departments on standby. And most of the time, those firefighters, even though the crowd doesn't know it, they're not really aware of it. They're usually responding to some fires and putting fires out, especially if it's in a community where there's any type of fire risk. So yeah, even sparklers all the way up to the types that we don't even sell here in the state of Utah are illegal. Yeah, the embers can be an immediate fire starter.
All right, thanks. Stacy Banks asks, can you recommend landscaping that is good within the 0 to 5 foot zone? That's the closest to the house, right? What kind of landscaping would you recommend there, or foliage? What kind of plants?
So a couple of guidelines for plants there, and there are some real good information out there online on Firewise landscaping. But the two best guidelines I can give is green. So plants that are very green, because that's just, it's difficult to burn them, much less start them on fire. And then plants that don't have a lot of oils in them. So, conifer trees, pines, things like that usually tend to have a lot of oils. But if you go online and search Firewise landscaping, there's a whole PDF booklet you can download. There are some good guidelines on there that will tell you exactly the specific species of plants to help you, but mainly green and no oil, you should be good.
All right, thank you, Jason. Really appreciate your time today, sharing all that information with us. Great information. Something we need to be aware of right now as we're entering wildfire season again. All right, and that is going to bring this day's webinar to a close. We want to remind you again, go to the link there to provide feedback for this presentation and any of the other presentations that you saw today. And if any of the earlier sessions, you can select the session that you saw. You can repeat that process for each of the sessions that you saw on that survey. The link is the link will be placed in the YouTube chat window there. We want, again, thank you all for joining us today and hope you will join us again tomorrow at this same time from 1 to 5 right here at the same location, youtube.com/BeReadyUtah. We want to thank each of our presenters today, our webinar planning team. We couldn't have done this without everyone's help and support. Just a couple of quick reminders. Coming up April 15th is the 10th edition of the Great Utah Shakeout. Please join us for this annual drill by registering at shakeout.org/Utah. Also go to bereadyutah.gov for more emergency preparedness information, similar to what you heard today. And again, remember to fill out the survey questions, the feedback questionnaires. And we will have a final overview or overall webinar survey for the entire event tomorrow afternoon. So please join us again tomorrow for that. In which you'll be entered into a prize drawing if you complete a survey for the overall webinar feedback survey. So please come back tomorrow and be able to enter a prize drawing. Watch also, these sessions have been recorded and they will be available again at the Be Ready Utah YouTube channel, as well as those from our November webinar. And look for our future Be Ready Utah webinar this coming fall, probably sometime in the September month, National Preparedness Month. So we will see you all tomorrow at 1 o'clock at the same place. And thank you for joining us.
Are you a frontline worker who works closely with the public? You could receive up to $400 compensation and free weekly COVID-19 testing for participating in a CDC Recover study. Email, call, or visit our website right now to learn more and apply.